World Geography, Southeast Asia and Oceania, Geographic Foundations. Here are the learning objectives. 1. Identify the countries of Southeast Asia and Oceania and describe their physical features, climate and vegetation, history, and political economic systems. 2. List the basic facts about Antarctica. This is rather a long video, so you may choose to break it up into parts so that you can watch it more easily. Thank you. Political maps. Southeast Asia. Here you have a political map of Southeast Asia. You should pause, take a moment, identify some of the main countries. You have Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and the tiny little countries of Brunei and Singapore. Australia and New Zealand. Again, take a moment, pause here, identify the locations of Australia and New Zealand. Oceania's Pacific Islands. Take another moment, pause, identify the island groups. You can see the island groups of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, and we'll talk about them later. Location maps. Here's a location map of Southeast Asia. You can see its relationship to other nearby countries. Here's a location map of Oceania. Notice that Oceania includes Australia, New Zealand, all the islands in the Pacific, and it also includes Papua New Guinea on the island of New Guinea. Countries of Southeast Asia, Vietnam. Facts. Vietnam is the easternmost country on the Indochina Peninsula. It has a population of around 90 million. Capital city, Hanoi. If you look to the right, you see a map and its location. Topography and vegetation. Being on the ocean means it has a long coastline, over 2,000 miles. If you go inland in Vietnam, it's a hilly, densely forested nation. Level land makes up no more than 20% of the country. Lots of tropical forests with the usual problem of nutrient-poor soil. They tend to cover about half of the country. Water resources. The Red River Delta is located in northern Vietnam, and it's a delta, so it means a lot of people live there, do a lot of farming. It was once an inlet of the Gulf of Tonkin, but it filled up over thousands of years with the alluvial deposits flowing downstream. Another river in the south is the Mekong River, makes up the Mekong River Delta. And then another main area of Vietnam that people like to go and visit and look at, it's beautiful, Ha Long Bay, the tourist destination. You can see a picture of it at the bottom. History. The Indochina Peninsula, it was colonized by the French in the mid-1800s. Eventually, the Vietnamese managed to get rid of the French after the First Indochina War in 1954. But the country, unfortunately, was divided into two states, North and South Vietnam. Following this episode, you had the Vietnam War, and this ended with a North Vietnamese victory over South Vietnamese troops and their American allies. This happened in 1975. Vietnam was then unified under a communist government. In the mid-1980s, when the economy wasn't doing so well, they tried some economic reform. So they deregulated different sectors of the economy. They opened them up to investment. They also allowed foreigners to come in and build factories, and that's direct foreign investment. Countries of Southeast Asia, Thailand. Facts. Thailand's also located on the Indochina Peninsula. Its population, about 64 million. Capital city, Bangkok. It's not a communist country like Vietnam. Instead, it's a constitutional monarchy, more like England. Primary religion, Buddhism. If you look to the right, you can see a location map of where Thailand is. Water resources. The main river in Thailand is the Mekong and the Chao Phraya. Both of these rivers support the commercial production of crops in Thailand, mainly rice. The Gulf of Thailand attracts lots of tourists and has clear, shallow waters. And on the other coast of Thailand, where the Andaman Sea is, there are more popular and luxurious resorts. World War II. During World War II, the Japanese basically attacked Thailand. They demanded the right to move troops across the country to the Malaysian frontier. The Thai army, of course, was no match for the Japanese, and they were quickly defeated. They signed an armistice, ceased hostilities, and they assisted the Japanese in the war against the Allies, but really behind their backs, they maintained an active anti-Japanese resistance movement. Post-war history. Thailand went through several decades of political instability following World War II. This period was characterized by coups d'etats, and that's where one military regime replaces another. It's an illegal seizure of power. Thailand has eventually emerged as a somewhat stable and prosperous democracy. It's a newly industrialized country, major exporter, rice and shrimp. Tourism also contributes significantly to the Thai economy. Countries of Southeast Asia, Myanmar. Facts. Myanmar, also referred to as Burma, is located in Southeast Asia. Its population, about 60 million. It too has a long coastline that is located along the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. If you look to the right, you can see a location map of where this country is located in relationship to its neighbors. Mountains and rivers. The mountain ranges in Myanmar tend to run from north to south off of the Himalayas. They divide Myanmar, and also there are 3 river systems in Myanmar: the Irrawaddy, the Salween, and the Sitong. Their fertile plains exist in the valleys along these rivers. History. Myanmar has been under military control since a coup d'etat back in 1962. Throughout this time, there's been consistent human rights violations, including acts of genocide, also the use of child soldiers, systematic rape, child labor, slavery, human trafficking, lack of freedom of speech. A prominent human rights activist from Myanmar is Aung San Suu Kyi. She's fought for more democratic rights in the country. Recently, the military has relinquished some of its control over the government, and relations with other countries have started to improve, although quite recently there's been a little backsliding on their commitment to democracy. Poverty. Myanmar, it's one of the poorest nations in Southeast Asia. Workforce is uneducated, little access to modern technology, an inadequate infrastructure, illegal drugs regularly smuggled out of the country from the Burmese Triangle, and energy shortages are common. Only about 25% of the population even have access to electricity. Resources. The major agricultural product is rice. This is mainly due to the climate in this region. There are also precious stones there like rubies, sapphires, pearls, jade. In fact, 90% of the world's rubies come from Myanmar. Countries of Southeast Asia, Malaysia. Pause a moment and look at this map. Malaysia is a very interesting country. It exists on the mainland, and it exists also on part of an Indonesian island. So you have basically peninsular Malaysia, and then you have Malaysian Borneo, because that part of Malaysia is on the island of Borneo. There are actually 3 countries that have occupied parts of Borneo. There's Brunei, Malaysia, and the country of Indonesia. Facts. Malaysia is separated by the South China Sea into 2 similarly sized regions. We just mentioned Peninsular Malaysia and Malaysian Borneo. It's a multi-ethnic, multicultural constitutional monarchy. It's modeled on the English parliamentary system, the legal system. It's based on English common law. Islam is the state religion, but freedom of religion is protected. Population is 29 million. Most of those live on the peninsula. The capital city is Kuala Lumpur. Topography and climate. Peninsular Malaysia and Malaysian Borneo, they share a similar landscape featuring coastal plains which rise to hills and mountains. The climate is equatorial with annual monsoons. Temperature, it's pretty moderated by the surrounding oceans. Economic development. Malaysia is a newly industrialized free enterprise economy. Remember that newly industrialized nations, that they're undergoing rapid economic growth, usually oriented towards exporting items. The economy usually traditionally been fueled by its natural resources, but the sectors of science, tourism, commerce, and medical tourism are beginning to expand. The Strait of Malacca, it's nearby. It's a choke point that lies between the islands of Sumatra and peninsular Malaysia, and it's a very important commercial thoroughfare. It carries about 40% of the world's trade on ships. Countries of Southeast Asia, Singapore. Facts. Singapore is an island city-state. It is a nation. They refer to it as a city-state. It's off the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, so it's almost part of Malaysia. The country is highly urbanized, has a population of about 5 million. About 75% of these are Chinese, and the rest are ethnic Malays and Indians. Singapore, extremely wealthy. It's located near that Strait of Malacca, so it gets a lot of trade in its port, a lot of banking and investment. It has the third highest per capita income in the world. History. The British obtained sovereignty over Singapore back in 1824. It was a British colony. It was then occupied by the Japanese in World War II, and then Singapore achieved its independence following the war. Government. Singapore is a unitary, multi-party, parliamentary republic. It's a mouthful. Its democratic credentials are in some doubt nowadays, though, because the same political party, has won every election since self-government in 1959. It's almost like the elections are rigged. The current government emphasizes a strong state, and they prioritize the collective welfare over the rights of the individual. So a little authoritarian there, but then some elements of democracy too. Economy. Singapore is a leading financial center in banking, like I spoke about. It has a busy port, busiest in the world. So its economy depends on exporting and manufacturing. Countries of Southeast Asia, Indonesia. Here's a location map of Indonesia. You can see its relationship to the other countries nearby. You'll notice that it's made up of many islands, so it's an archipelago. Here's a different way of looking at Indonesia, showing the different provinces across several islands. Facts. Indonesia, it's an equatorial archipelago. It comprises over 17,000 islands. Only about 6,000 are inhabited. The largest islands are Java, Sumatra, Borneo, New Guinea, and Sulawesi. There's 34 provinces, population over 238 million people. Capital city, Jakarta. It's a moderate republic, has an elected legislature and president, and this is very important. It's the world's largest Muslim country. So the world's largest Muslim country, it's not in Southwest Asia or the Middle East. It's in Southeast Asia. Seismic and volcanic activity. Indonesia's location on the edge of the Pacific, Eurasian, and Australian tectonic plates makes it a site for numerous volcanoes and frequent earthquakes. There are at least 150 active volcanoes. One of them is Krakatoa, which exploded in the 1800s, one of the most major eruptions on the planet. Seismic activity triggered the 2004 Christmas Day tsunami, which killed an estimated 167,000 people. Those deaths didn't just happen in Indonesia, though. They happened all across this region, in Thailand and Myanmar, any countries nearby that were victims of this tsunami. History. Indonesian history, it's been influenced by foreign powers that have been drawn there because of its natural resources. It was Muslim traders that brought Islam, and then the Europeans, they brought Christianity with them. It Eventually, they were colonized by the Dutch, people of the Netherlands. And then eventually they secured their independence, Indonesia did, after World War II. Indonesia's history has been turbulent, with challenges posed by natural disasters, corruption, separatism. That means parts of Indonesia didn't want to be part of Indonesia. They wanted their independence. Also, Indonesia has gone through a process of democracy and rapid economic change. Economy. Indonesia has a mixed economy. So it's a little bit of state intervention along with some free enterprise. So both the government and the individual play a role. The industrial sector is very large there, and there are extensive natural resources like crude oil, natural gas, tin, copper, gold. Countries of Southeast Asia, Philippines. Facts. The Philippines is an archipelago. It's categorized into three main geographical divisions: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Population is more than 92 million. And actually, about 12 million Filipinos, they live overseas. Capital city is Manila. Government. The Philippines is a constitutional republic with a presidential system, much like here in the United States. It's governed as a unitary state, but there is an autonomous province in the south. It's Muslim Mindanao. Seismic and volcanic activity. The Philippines is situated on the Pacific Ring of Fire, and so they experience frequent seismic and volcanic activity. Because of the volcanic activity, there's lots of mineral deposits in the region, but they haven't made good use of them due to poor management and kind of an environmental consciousness where they don't want to disturb the environment. So they haven't really made a lot of money off these natural resources at this point, or these mineral deposits. They have a lot of geothermal energy, which is another product of volcanic activity. In fact, 18% of the country's electricity needs, they're met by this inexhaustible energy resource. Climate. The Philippines has a tropical maritime climate. It's usually hot and humid, very near the equator. The country is astride the typhoon belt, so most of the islands experience annual torrential rains and thunderstorms from July to October. Remember, a typhoon is the same as a hurricane. History. The arrival of Ferdinand Magellan in 1521. This marked the beginning of the eventual Spanish colonization of the Philippines. Of course, if you know your history, Spain lost the Philippines to the United States following the Spanish-American War in 1898. And then the Treaty of Manila established the Philippines as an independent nation following an occupation by the Japanese during World War II. Economy. Philippines is a newly industrialized country, and they've been transitioning from agriculture to services and manufacturing. However, the Philippine economy is smaller than its Southeast Asian neighbors. A lot of the economy relies upon remittances from Filipinos that work abroad. They send some money home to help the family. Countries of Oceania, Australia. Facts. Australia is a country in Oceania, So he moved on from Southeast Asia down to Oceania. It comprises the mainland of the Australian continent, and it also includes the island of Tasmania and numerous smaller islands nearby. The population of Australia is 23 million, not very large. It's the world's smallest continent. Physical features. One of the major tourist attractions in Australia is the Great Barrier Reef. It's the world's largest coral reef, and it's off the northeast coast. In the center of the continent, there's a dry desert. We refer to it as the outback. Australia, unfortunately for them, has some of the oldest and least fertile soil in the world. Mountain range. The most significant mountain range is the Great Dividing Range in Australia. It runs for about 2,000 miles along the length of the eastern coastline. There's a sharp rise between the coastal lowlands and then these eastern mountains. And this is partly responsible for the very dry outback interior. Remember, this is the effect of the orographic precipitation and the rain shadow effect. Uluru. Uluru, or Ayers Rock. It's a sandstone formation. It's kind of in the middle of the country. It has cultural significance to the Aboriginal people. Indigenous peoples. The human habitation of the Australian continent is estimated to have begun around 42,000 to 48,000 years ago. It's a long time. Migration to the continent began when early people crossed land bridges, or they sailed across the sea between Southeast Asia and Australia, hopping kind of from one island to the next. At the end of the Ice Age, the seas began to rise, cut off some of these land routes, made the sea passages longer and more treacherous. So the routes to migration, they were kind of unavailable after this. The first inhabitants were the ancestors then of today's indigenous Aboriginal Australians. And the Aboriginal people traditionally, although this is changing, but traditionally they've been hunter-gatherers. They've had a complex oral culture. They don't have a written language, so they tell stories in order to preserve their culture. And they have spiritual values that are based on a reverence for the land. European peoples. After discovery by Dutch settlers in 1606, Australia's eastern half was then claimed by Great Britain in 1770, and they chose to settle Australia through penal transportation. So what England did is basically send their convicts to Australia, and this ended in 1848. On January 1st, 1901, the 6 Australian colonies, they came together, they federated, and they formed the Commonwealth of Australia, still under the control of the English at that time. Indigenous peoples decline. The indigenous Aboriginal population, it was estimated at the time of European arrival to be between 750,000 and 1 million, and then it rapidly declined because of infectious disease. A government policy of assimilation resulted in the removal of many Aboriginal children from their families and communities. And this generation that was taken from their families, they refer to them as the stolen generation. Government. Australia maintains a liberal democratic political system. It functions as a federal parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II of England, she's also the Queen of Australia. It's kind of an honorary title. And the Queen is represented in Australia by viceroys and a governor general. However, in reality, the Queen's representatives, they don't really interfere in the elected democratic government. Economy. Australia is a highly developed country and one of the wealthiest, considering it has such a small population. It has the 12th largest economy in the world. It has 5th highest per capita income. It has the 2nd highest Human Development Index. Quite prosperous. Countries of Oceania, New Zealand. Facts. New Zealand's made up of 2 main islands and then some smaller islands nearby. 2 islands are named North Island and South Island. It's pretty easy to remember. They're separated by the Cook Strait. South Island is divided along its spine by the Southern Alps. North Island is less mountainous, but it's marked by some volcanic activity. Climate. The southern and southwestern parts of South Island, they're a little bit further away from the equator, closer to Antarctica, so they have a cooler and cloudier climate. And then in the north of South Island, it gets a little bit sunnier. The snow season on South Island runs between July and October. Remember, their summers are our winters and vice versa. Snow is less common on North Island. It occurs sometimes. Vegetation. Before arrival of humans, 80% of New Zealand was covered in forest. However, like most places in the world, it experienced deforestation. Around half of the forest cover was lost to fire after Polynesian settlement, even before the Europeans arrived. Then, when the Europeans arrived, they tended to clear the forest for logs to make room for farming. Forests now occupy only about 23% of New Zealand. Settlement. Polynesians, people from the nearby islands, they first settled New Zealand in 1250 to the 1300. And they developed what was called a Maori culture. Came to develop a distinct identity. In 1840, the British and the Maori, they signed the Treaty of Waitangi, and this made New Zealand a colony of the British Empire. Conflicts between settlers and natives resulted in the ultimate confiscation of much Maori land. The country adopted the Statute of Westminster in 1947, and this was just an agreement with England that they could no longer legislate for New Zealand, that they would have to obtain the consent of the people of New Zealand. Government. New Zealand is a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy. Again, like Australia, the Queen is head of state, but she cannot exercise her power without the advice of the New Zealand cabinet. The House of Representatives, the Parliament, is democratically elected. And like, say, Canada, the government is formed from the party with the majority of seats. And the Prime Minister is the parliamentary leader of the governing party and the head of the government. Economy. New Zealand has a very prosperous market capitalism, free enterprise economy. They're heavily dependent on international trade, particularly agricultural products. There's lots of sheep and lambs, lots of agricultural products there. countries of Oceania, Pacific Islands. Oceania's Pacific Islands. If you'll pause here for a moment and observe how the Pacific Ocean has several islands in it off of the coast of Australia, and they're grouped into different groups. You have Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. Regions. Oceania, it's a geographical region that's centered on the many islands of the tropical Pacific Ocean. It includes Papua New Guinea, which we didn't really talk about too much, and it also includes Australia and New Zealand. The cluster of islands north and east of Australia is called Melanesia. The name means black islands. It refers to the inhabitants' dark skin. Then north of Melanesia, along the equator, are about 2,000 islands. This is Micronesia, and the name means tiny islands. Then you have Polynesia, which is the largest island group, referring to New Zealand itself, also Samoa, Tahiti, and Hawaii. And this name means many islands. Continental islands. The largest islands are usually continental islands. These were islands that were once connected to a continent by a bridge of land, but at some point they became separated from the larger landmass following the Ice Age. Rising sea levels submerged the land bridges that isolated these new islands. Or the rising sea levels actually isolated these new islands, Tectonic plate movement formed other continental islands. New Zealand itself was once part of a much larger landmass. Volcanic islands. Volcanic islands, they begin when a volcano erupts on the ocean floor. This causes lava and ash to build up over a long period of time on the seabed. And then once the lava and ash accumulate, eventually the island rises above the sea level. Most volcanic islands are cone-shaped, and they have steep sides that rise to a peak. Some examples are Fiji, Samoa, and the Hawaiian Islands. Atoll. An atoll is a ring of coral islands and reefs that surround a shallow body of water called a lagoon. So atolls begin their lives as coral reefs that grow around a volcanic island. And a coral reef is, coral is the home of a tiny sea animal. They build their houses on top of one another until eventually these coral reefs kind of break the surface of the ocean. In this case of an atoll, what happens to the volcanic island surrounded by these coral reefs is that the island eventually, over a long period of time, it sinks beneath the sea. Things like tectonic plate movement, rising sea levels, erosion, these can all cause islands to disappear. When the island disappears and goes beneath the sea, then the area above the sunken volcano, we call that a lagoon now, and the lagoon is ringed by these coral reefs. What happens then is that ocean waves break apart the reef and bits of coral pile up to form sandy islands around the lagoon. Here you have photos of the different types of islands. You have continental islands on the left. You have a volcanic island on the top right, and on the bottom right is the atoll, where in the center of that atoll is a volcano, but you don't see it because now it's just underneath the water. Antarctica. Facts. Antarctica is the southernmost continent. It contains the geographic South Pole About 98% of the continent is covered by ice, which averages about 1 mile in thickness. It's the coldest, driest, and windiest continent. Wait a minute, with all that snow, how can it be so dry? Well, it turns out that the continent's considered a desert. It has annual precipitation of only 8 inches along the coast, and far less the more inland you go. So this is a desert based on its level of precipitation. There are no permanent human residents, but there are researchers that reside across the continent in research stations. Climate and vegetation, tropics. Climate map. You can pause a moment and analyze this climate map of the region. You're going to find that they have a lot of tropical and tropical wet and dry climate zones because these areas are near the equator, although Australia has several different climate zones a little bit further away from the equator. Tropical wet. The tropical wet climate is found in coastal parts of Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Pacific Islands of Oceania, and it's found in most of Malaysia, most of Indonesia, and the Philippines. In this tropical wet climate, average annual temperature about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and many places receive between 100 to 200 inches of rain a year. It's quite a bit. Elevation, ocean breezes, other factors, this can cool down the temperature a little bit. It's not quite as hot as you might think. Tropical wet and dry. So bordering the tropical wet climate, you usually find the tropical wet and dry climate. And in this area, monsoons also shape the weather. The tropical wet and dry climate, you can find that in parts of Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. It's generally to the north or a little bit inland of the tropical wet climate, because as you move north, you move away from the equator, so you're not going to have quite that tropical climate anymore. Parts of Oceania and northern Australia, they also have this tropical wet, dry climate. Vegetation. Southeast Asia has great diversities of vegetation, a remarkable number of tree species. A very valuable tree is the teak, which is harvested commercially from the deciduous forest. Teak makes great furniture. It's water resistant. The smaller Pacific Islands of Oceania, they don't really have diverse vegetation because they have poor soil. However, on islands with volcanoes and volcanic soil, there are abundant flowers and trees. Climate and vegetation, moderate. Humid subtropical. The northeastern coast of Australia, and then northern Vietnam and Laos and Thailand and Myanmar, they have a humid subtropical climate. Remember, you'll find this climate along the Gulf Coast here in the United States. Summers are hot, winters are mild, and there's heavy rainfall. Marine West Coast. Southeastern Australia and New Zealand, they each have a marine West Coast climate. It's a very nice climate. In the United States, you'll find this in San Francisco, up through Seattle, on into Vancouver, and even parts of Alaska. There's mild temperatures year-round because the ocean breezes, they warm the land in the winter and they cool it in the summer. Vegetation, evergreens and tree ferns, they thrive in New Zealand's forests. Climate and vegetation, hot and cold deserts. Desert and semi-arid. 1/3 of Australia is desert, lies in a great oval in the center of the continent. This region receives less than 10 inches of rain a year. Encircling the Australian desert is a band of semi-arid climate, and crops can only be grown in this region if you use irrigation techniques. Ice cap. Antarctica, Earth's coldest and driest continent, has an ice cap climate. The extremely cold air doesn't really hold moisture well, so Antarctica's air has only about 1/10 of the water vapor found in the atmosphere of more temperate regions. As we mentioned earlier, Antarctica is often called a polar desert. It has heavy snow and ice cover because that snow just does not melt. When it comes down, it doesn't go away. River systems. Mekong. The Mekong River crosses several countries in Southeast Asia, major river. It begins in around the Tibetan Plateau, and it runs through China's Yunnan province, then on through Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and then on to southern Vietnam. Irrawaddy. The Irrawaddy flows north to south through Myanmar. It's a commercial waterway, carries a considerable amount of export goods to market. Murray-Darling Basin. The Murray-Darling Basin is located in the interior of southeastern Australia. The basin receives little direct rainfall. This basin drains a large area of Australia and supports a large agricultural area. The end. Thank you very much for your attention.